and to look around at my fellow board members ready to go to work. We have an exciting day ahead of us. We're going to swear in a new member of the board, and I'm going to begin with that because we want her sworn in before we do any official business. I would like to introduce you to Norma Kupian, who's here with us today. She's had the pleasure, I'm sure, of spending most of the morning with Katie and I, and she's still here, so I think that's really a good sign. Norma comes to us out of LA, and she is with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. She is working with women and non-binary service manager for ARC. She has some lived experience in the criminal justice system, but beyond that, she is all about assisting with reentry, and she is compassionate about her subject matter. She is lending her efforts and style to young people who are coming out of prison and back into the community. She's a fierce advocate, and she often spends time in Sacramento and advocates for her cause. I am delighted to have her on the board. She has worked with over 1,300 formerly incarcerated members, and we couldn't be happier for her perspective. Welcome to you, Norma. You're going to tell us more about yourself. I just do the print introduction. She has graciously learned of her appointment yesterday and appeared today. So what we know about Norma is she is nimble and ready to roll. And I am going to, before you make some remarks, ask you to stand, and I will do the oath of office. And I promise not to get too excitable and go on too long before you repeat what I say.
Good.
You're going to raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Norma Kumpian,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California.
I take this obligation freely,
I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Yay! Thank you.
Good, Linda.
It was good, and
Yeah.
she was looking at me, she had such faith and belief that I was going to do the right thing. So Norma's had an opportunity to unofficially meet board members. I'd like you to take an opportunity to introduce yourself and say anything you'd like to say.
Thank you for such a warm welcome here. Everyone is so nice and welcoming. I really appreciate that. She was not kidding about being told about this yesterday. It was not. It wasn't just for a joke. So I am working at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, but prior to that, I really feel I want to share with you that I'm actually formerly incarcerated, and I spent 18 years inside state prison. I am a former life prisoner. I received my first try to go home, my first parole when it was during Arnold's tenure, and I was reversed twice by the governor, and I was let out by the courts. When I came home, my son was already almost an adult. He would say he was an adult, but he was 17, and he was on his way to Afghanistan. And so my son went, and I did not see him until he came back from his tour in Afghanistan, and he came back with a Purple Heart. He left military service as a sergeant, and he now works in Dallas, Texas, and going to school And I'm very proud that he wants to be an FBI agent. It's also, yes, I'm like, do we need to go to therapy for this? But yeah. Okay. But I have always been in contact with my son. I was very fortunate to have a lot of good people in my life that believed in me, and my parents, my friends, my son. And so I'm so honored that he turned out to be a good man. And because of that, it's really given me the strength to be able to look back at where I came from and to offer a hand and to just kind of offer some hope. I go inside the women's prison once to CIW a month and once to Chowchilla every month. And it gives me a great pleasure to be able to do that, and that my experience is able to help other people. When I came home, I started working at a place called the Center for Restorative Justice Works. I was hired by a nun named Sister Suzanne Jabro, and then I moved on to the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And people ask, like, was there a lot of difference? And I joke that the nuns cussed more than the ARC. She would love that if she were here. So I worked with the sisters to take kids to see their parents in prison. And so that's how I started off in my world here. And it was very healing for me to meet those children and to be with those children as they went on their journeys to visit their parent in prison. So then I'm at the ARC now, and now I'm here with you. So thank you all for welcoming me. It's a great honor to be here, and I will always act honorably to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. We could not be more pleased. Kudos to a fabulous appointment by the governor. We have a big agenda today, so I'm going to ask Adam to do the roll call.
Chair Penner,
Present?
Ms. Kumpion,
Present?
Mr. Diaz,
Present.
Mr. Green,
Present.
Mr. Grouden,
Here.
Mr. Gore,
Here.
Mr. Seal,
Here.
Mr. Ortola, Mr. Barranco, Mr. Mills,
Here.
Mr. Budnick is absent today, and Mr. Seinhardt.
Here.
Madam
do we
Chair,
have a
we have a
quorum?
quorum.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Budnick's absent is excused, correct? Okay. I'd like to announce and introduce once again our General Counsel for the BSCC, Erin McGuire, present today. Also, and you will soon hear from Katie Howard, our Executive Director. I am going to take an opportunity today to, as the chair, to make some opening remarks about the agenda that's before us today. The BSCC has many charges and obligations. One that we consider highly important is our jail inspections. We inspect 558 facilities throughout the state of California. We do that with great personal commitment and make every effort to ensure the safety of those incarcerated in California and the compliance with minimum standards. And to that end, during the budget cycle this year, the governor emphasized his desire to ensure that we upped our game towards greater transparency, towards greater report out to this board regarding those inspections. And today we will launch an effort that is simply the beginning of what we think will be a long, ongoing process to improve this inspection cycle and formalize reports back to this board about technical advice given to jails and sheriffs across the state and agencies and jails that continue long-term out of compliance. I think the board will become very interactive in this process. Down the road, we will provide extensive training about the jail inspection process. It is a serious, serious obligation we have in these inspections, and the governor couldn't be more serious about his desire to make it better, safer, and much more transparent. We're going to start the process today, but as I said, this process is going to be a long-range effort by the board, and I look to each of you to add your subject matter expertise to this effort and to ensure that we are as transparent and forward-thinking as we can be as we do this. With that said, I'm going to invite Alice. Oh no, Katie, do you want to do your report first, and then we'll address the agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My name is Katie Howard. I'm the Executive Director. I'd like to add my official welcome to Norma. We're delighted that you're here. I have a brief report today, and in support of what Chair Penner has just outlined about this really huge focus we're putting on the jail inspections and making improvements to that process, I wanted to do a little bit of logistics with you to start off. For our 2020 board meeting schedule, we are next up on April 9th, and we had initially indicated that that might be a meeting held outside of Sacramento. We're recommending holding the April 9th meeting here in Sacramento, and then in June, based on all of this new involvement for the board directly in overseeing some of these inspection issues, we're proposing holding a 2-day meeting in San Diego. And thank you to Sheriff Gore, who has helped us to identify a county meeting facility, actually a training facility, I think it is. So we have Thursday, June 11th, and what Linda has asked for, what Chair Penner has asked for, is that we plan a fairly in-depth briefing session from Allison Ganter and her team about how we do the jail inspection so that all of you can be better grounded in that increased oversight role that you're going to have. So our hope is that we would be able to do a detailed briefing on Thursday afternoon and then hold the board meeting on Friday morning. And so if you could please check your calendars today, if you don't have all your information with you and need to, check for things at your office or what have you, please let Adam know ASAP if you can do that Thursday to Friday. I guess I'd like to ask, although it's never a good idea to try to schedule by committee, but does anybody know they absolutely cannot do Friday the 12th of June? Okay,
Well,
that's a
it would
good
be
start.
June 11th and 12th,
Right.
correct?
So we already had June 11th booked.
Okay.
So we're looking to add on the 12th. And Adam did check with Mr. Budnick, who's available on the 12th. Okay, so far that's looking like a possibility. Please confirm ASAP, and those would, of course, both be public meetings on Thursday afternoon and Friday morning. All right, great. So I want to give you just a very quick couple of updates, starting with our grants division. Coming up on February 20th, we have requested the California Department of Finance Office of State Audits and Evaluation to come and give our team some grant management training. We want to have a more in-depth understanding of the state audit process, common audit findings, how to avoid those findings, and then a discussion on match issues, which is something that comes up frequently as we put out our RFPs. So that's coming up next week. Also, the State Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention is meeting in the Bay Area on February 20th in Oakland, and we have that agenda posted. Happy to answer any questions you may have about that. And then also coming up soon, we intend to have the bidders conference for our Prop 64 Public Health and Safety Grant, and that's on your agenda today for the approval of that RFP on the cannabis-related grant out to local governments. In addition, this board will recall that we were able to make use of some of our federal JAG grant for a special focus on mental health training, and 141 agencies across the state received some additional grant funding for critical mental health training for local correctional officers and probation staff. We had a webinar on January 14th to provide information to the locals about how the funding can be used and how the reporting requirements are supposed to work. We had a great turnout to that. Over 140 people participated in the webinar, and the agencies now have until September of this year to use that funding that they were awarded. Aaron, do you have any legal update? I think you do have a legal update.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to just note, as we usually do at the top of the hearing, that we have a few grants that are on the agenda, and I'd ask you to take a look at some of the eligibility criteria to make sure that we have a good conflict check. We have the YRG grant that's on consent, which we're actually going to pull off the consent calendar that we'll briefly discuss and amend. We have the California Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant, which is the eligibility for that are cities and CBOs. I know I've already talked to Mr. Barenko and Ms. Kumpion about stepping out when we come to that agenda item. And then the other grant is the Prop 64 Public Health and Safety Grant. That one's a little more complicated because cities and counties are eligible for those funds. That's for local mitigation for related to the sale of cannabis. However, the eligibility is that your city or county has to have not banned the cultivation or retail sale. I don't know what your status of your counties or cities might be on that case. So you may not be eligible at all for the employer entity, but if you think you might be competing for that for those dollars, again, we would ask you to step out at that time. My other legal update has to do with recent litigation regarding our federal grants. You may recall that we had the state of California sued the federal government a third time over the immigration-related conditions that were attached to the Justice Assistance Grants, the Burn JAG funds. That lawsuit has just wrapped up with a stipulation and an order, and so that will, and basically what the order says is that they recognize that the federal government lost the prior two previous lawsuits, and the federal government recognizes that and then therefore won't be enforcing those same conditions that they had tried to attach to the third year of JAG funds and other funds. So that has wrapped up, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those, but that will basically free up our 2019 funds so that we can continue with the JAG program going forward.
Any questions or comments on the executive director report or legal counsel's report? Seeing none, we're going to move to our consent items, but as a reminder, before we do that, anyone wishing to make public comments, as always, there are comment cards by the door, and you could provide those to Tracy or Adam, and it's regarding a specific agenda item. We'd honor that before the item is voted on, and then there's always, at the end of the meeting, before we adjourn, an opportunity to comment on anything that you wish to have considered by the board. So I think I heard we're going to pull B from the consent agenda, correct?
Yeah, very briefly.
Okay, so then I would invite the board to entertain, if they would like to pull.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda,
So that,
excluding item B.
okay, remaining A is thank you, we have a motion and a second, and the approval of the meeting minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I think we'll just take item B now. It seems expedient.
Do you want me to go? I mean, I asked that this be pulled off just because it has to do with the Youth Reinvestment Grants Committee, which, and ESC, which I've chaired. Excuse me. And the proposal is to modify some of the eligibility language to clarify who can apply for grants across 2 grant cycles. So this is a proposal to change one word in the modified language in the RFP on page 4 at the bottom. In the last line, adding the word additional. So the subgrantee, under those circumstances, is only eligible to receive an aggregate amount of up to $100,000 for all additional applications. It's a technicality. It's clarifying. I don't know that it needs any further discussion. The staff is okay with it. Aaron, do you have?
Yeah, and the context, and then the other edits, and actually, and I apologize for this, I should have mentioned, this youth reinvestment grant, because of CBOs might be eligible, I would ask Mr. Barenko and Ms. Kumpion at this point to step out of the room, because we are going to vote on it and discuss it briefly.
Okay.
Welcome to your first meeting. Now,
Well, welcome to your first meeting.
the rule
Thank
is
you.
you can't go too far away.
And anyone else who might have a conflict, I don't believe we had any recusals when we first heard this RFP. The other recusals when we heard this RFP at our last meeting. But briefly, the reason why we're asking for additional edits on this RFP and an extension of time to allow grantees to respond to this is we had some concerns. We had asked, the Executive Steering Committee recommendation was that to not allow prior grantees of last year's money to be eligible for this year's money. We had a concern that was raised from the field from a sub-grantee who receives a very nominal amount of money, about, I think, $40,000 or so, to provide some services, who expressed some concerns about being disqualified from subsequent rounds. I believe, and Mr. Steinhardt will echo this, that it was not the intent to disqualify folks from receiving nominal amounts of money, so we are making that fix with the amendment on page 4. And then to follow up with what Mr. Steinhardt said, is we are going to make an edit to the language that's on page 4, adding the word additional between all and applications in that last sentence, just for additional clarification. And with that, I would turn it back over to the board for further action.
So I hope that everybody followed that carefully. But it does make sense, and I would move the proposed changes in the RFP language. As
Motion
amended.
second. Do we have anyone in the public that would like to speak to this agenda item?
We do not.
Seeing none, I'd now move back to the board. Any board members? I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing no opposed, noting that Judge Branco and Norma Kupian are out of the room. Motion carries, and I would ask somebody to invite them back. Welcome back. So we have moved to the action discussion items portion of the agenda, and we're going to begin with item C. It is Allison Ganter who will present on behalf of staff.
Excellent. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Allison Ganter. I'm the Deputy Director of the Facility Standards and Operations Division. And as Chair Penner mentioned, I'm here before you today to request approval of an initial plan to enhance our jail inspection process when items of non-compliance remain uncorrected at local detention facilities. So I'm confident that through this enhanced inspection process, we can fulfill the governor's directive to strengthen oversight of our jails by implementing consistent timeframes for corrective action, more actively engaging counties with our board, and providing increased transparency in our jail inspection processes. So a few points before I dive into the report. All but 2 counties' detention facilities are run by a sheriff. Napa and Madera counties are run by a director of the Department of Corrections. I'm going to use the term sheriff for convenience throughout this report, and that will apply to directors of corrections in those 2 counties as well. Also, I'm going to talk about the enhanced jail inspection process at a conceptual level. As we've discussed, we're going to be asking the board for some input and direction as we define timeframes and clarify processes to best operationalize this improved process. And then the final point is we are nearing the end of our current biennial inspection cycle. That'll end on June 30th of this year. We'll begin a new cycle on July 1st of 2020. So any changes to inspection processes would happen at that point. So just for clarification. So the penal code currently requires the BSCC to establish minimum standards for the operation, design, and construction of local detention facilities, biennially inspect those detention facilities, and regularly review and revise the minimum standards for those facilities. All of our inspection reports are sent to the county's presiding judge, Board of Supervisors, and grand jury. Reports are posted on our website, and we submit a report to the legislature at the end of each two-year inspection cycle, and that report outlines any outstanding items of noncompliance. So today, consistent with the governor's proposed budget, we're recommending a plan that will enhance our jail inspection process to increase local accountability, transparency, and compliance. This enhanced approach will bring attention to local detention facilities that remain out of compliance with minimum standards and that fail to complete or adhere to corrective action plans after a prescribed period of time. The multi-step process is outlined in your board report, and I'll highlight enhancements in 4 parts: in initial inspection reports, in final inspection reports, corrective action plans, and board reporting. So under this new plan, at the exit briefing, immediately following the on-site portion of the inspection, BSCC field representatives will now be issuing a formal initial inspection report to the sheriff. A clock of sorts will begin at this point, and this report will outline any items of noncompliance that are identified during that inspection. We expect that most counties, when they receive that initial inspection report, will begin working on corrective action at that time. After the initial inspection report, field representatives will then, as usual, complete their final inspection report within a prescribed number of days after the initial on-site inspection. We're recommending a period of 60 days in which to issue that final report. And all outstanding items of noncompliance will be captured on that final inspection report. Any items of noncompliance that have been corrected from the on-site portion of the inspection to the time this final inspection report has been issued will appear as corrected on this final inspection report. We want to make sure to capture all identified items of noncompliance in that report, even those that have already been addressed. And a lot can happen in the time periods after an inspection until the final inspection report. We do see that the majority of counties will begin corrective action or even fully correct items of noncompliance during that time. So the next portion after the final inspection report is issued is the corrective action plan. If items of noncompliance remain on the final inspection report, the sheriff will be required to provide a corrective action plan or CAP to the BSCC staff within a certain number of days. We're recommending 30 days in which to provide a corrective action plan to BSCC staff. And that corrective action plan will outline, will identify outstanding items of noncompliance and can also include any action that the sheriff's already taken since the on-site inspection to begin correcting issues. We don't have a defined period of time for corrective action at this point because some items will take longer than others, but we are planning to put in timeframes in which corrective action will need to be taken after the final inspection report and the corrective action plan is received. The most significant change to our inspection process will be board engagement. So if the sheriff is not able to complete corrective action within the prescribed time frame or doesn't submit a corrective action plan to the BSCC, those issues will be brought to the board and the sheriff may be required to appear before the board at that time. So staff will take all outstanding items of noncompliance and related corrective action that's been taken, compile it into a report for the board, and also post it on our website. At regular board meetings, which of course are public, the BSCC staff will provide members with this report highlighting outstanding items of noncompliance by agency and facility, and any corrective action or plans that the sheriff has implemented at that time. Staff will also indicate if a corrective action plan hasn't been received by a sheriff. We are planning on presenting items of non-compliance to the board in categories such as significant or serious, that would have an adverse effect on life, health, or safety at the facility. Policy update needed. Perhaps an agency's procedures are in compliance with minimum standards, but policy updates are needed to align the policy and the practice. Training update needed. There might be training needing to happen at the local level in order to achieve and maintain compliance, and any physical plant issues. Staff recommends that the sheriff be required to appear at the board, before the board at the next regularly scheduled board meeting when items that the board deems significant or serious remain out of compliance, and/or the sheriff has failed to submit a corrective action plan or has failed to meet the components of that corrective action plan. And other board action that you may consider is following up on the agency's corrective action plan, requesting more information from the sheriff, or following up with the local court, board of supervisors, or grand jury at that time. So staff is recommending that the board approved the proposed outline of steps to enhance the adult jail inspection process consistent with the governor's budget, and direct staff to update the juvenile inspection process in a conforming fashion to add a similar layer of transparency and accountability to the juvenile detention facility inspection process as well. And to implement this plan, we're also recommending that the board direct staff to develop a work plan and report back to the board at the June 2020 meeting for final approval of this detailed, enhanced process for regular reporting and follow-up to the board on both adult and juvenile detention facility inspections. Happy to take any questions you may have. Thanks.
I would now open it to the board for any questions or comment. Sheriff Gore?
One question, Allison, on if there, a deficiency is noted during the inspection, it's corrected during the inspection, would that be highlighted in the report? Or
So if it was identified and then corrected, we'd identify it in the final inspection report as corrected, and it wouldn't appear in that final report.
Mr. Steinhardt?
So what's the relationship between what we're doing today and what you're proposing to approve in June? Is there a finalization of, I missed that part.
Yes, so the plan that we've put into the board report and the one that I talked about is really conceptual at this point. We want to have some time with the board to provide more detail about our current inspection processes and also get some input on timeframes or board reporting or how the board may follow up or how you would like staff to implement some of those plans. So we're asking for approval of this plan at a conceptual level and then come back and
Because I see the letter from CJCJ saying that there wasn't sufficient community input. We may have public comment on that, but that would extend the time before the whole process is finalized, would it not?
It could, yes.
Okay, good. And I had another question. What about a point of non-compliance that arises between the two-year inspection cycle? I mean, something that gets into the press that's like really controversial and so on, but it's not on your inspection timetable. How would that be addressed by this plan?
Well, we are authorized right now to do biennial inspections at a minimum. So we don't have investigative authority, so we wouldn't necessarily be responsive to something that came out in the media. Certainly, as we read articles of concern, we put them in our files for the next regularly scheduled inspection.
And I think part and parcel of your question, Mr. Steinhardt, could be answered in that what Allison said was at a minimum they're biannual inspections. If a need arises in the interim, the frequency could be, upped. And so I don't pretend to think that we only go in once every 2 years. And we certainly understand that frequency and any public acknowledgement that there are issues going on require inspection staff to go back in. Anything else? Yeah.
I have a question.
Mr. Seal.
Thank you, Allison. So I think part of what's being proposed here is greater transparency, and that's something that I support, and I thank the work that's been done to achieve that goal. Question I have, would you characterize the actual staff level engagement in with the process? Is that, should we be thinking of that as being in some way more thorough or more substantive? Is it going to be more workload? In a practical question, is their staff appropriate to follow up with this, or I don't know if this is outside the purview, but I imagine we'll be asked whether or not there'll be a staff augmentation that's sought or proposed as part of this process. Or is the focus more just along the lines of transparency and reporting?
May I address that?
Oh.
I think I can help there.
Absolutely,
You know, it's certainly, this is a great starting point. It's emerging. I think the governor has expressed great interest in this process, and we're uncertain exactly what that translates into when the budget arrives, you know, months from now. So it's difficult to answer that question because, of course, our boss is absolutely concerned about the issue, and we'll continue working with them. This is the framework we set now, and we'll see what it looks like in the final process.
Yeah, well, I say this as, you know, my day job is an interested stakeholder because we are subject to this process as the chief of a juvenile facility. And, you know, we're not ordinarily in the business of saying, you know, more audits, more inspections, et cetera, but, you know, there's value to it. And we get enormous value, and it's really high-quality engagement we get from our BSCC representative. She comes to us with good suggestions, and you know, the process keeps us out of hot water. And I think that from that point of view, you know, in light of we're not deaf to what's been the kinds of community and media concerns have come up. You know, I think there's value in making sure we do this right. So I'm going to be interested in this.
Sheriff Gore.
Yeah, to follow on Lee's point, this was heavily discussed at our last state sheriff's meeting a couple of weeks ago. And as you can imagine, a lot of these recommendations that have come out in the past and will come out in the future involve significant capital expenditures to improve facilities, to build more facilities. And I think being a glasses half full type of guy in the organization, I think the state sheriff's looked at that way, that by highlighting some of these issues, I think in making it a group responsibility with the Board of Supervisors that allocate our funds, I can see some very positive things coming out of it. I think the sheriffs, obviously we want to provide the best in medical care, mental health care, and safety in our facilities that we can, but a lot of these upgrades take money, and to the extent we can highlight some of those deficiencies and go to our boards and say, hey, do you want to come up with me when I publicly testify in front of the BSCC? You're welcome to. I think hopefully it'll be a positive program.
Agreed. Yes, Sheriff.
I got a couple comments related to what Bill and Chief Seal said. Obviously, we get a lot of great help from our field reps. A lot of the issues of non-compliance are just, you know, errors that were made that are easy to address. And like Sheriff Gore said, you know, the more persistent issues of non-compliance really often relate to funding. The plant issues are, I mean, those are difficult to address. And one thing that I didn't mention or see in the document is staffing and staffing levels. Sometimes those contribute to deficiencies, and those things are obviously tied to funding. And so I have a strong interest in the technical support area, and like Chair Penner said, this is early on. There is doesn't sound like there's funding now, but that's an area where I have a strong interest, especially the small counties where they have, you know, very small public works agencies, and, you know, they just don't have the kind of support they might need to come into compliance in some of these areas. You know, an area that might be helpful is like a staffing analysis. So if we could, I mean, I think that's something we need to try to pursue, is that technical support for agencies to help them in those more complex areas. But I appreciate the work you've done so far.
I think on the lines of Sheriff Gore and Dean, is that with audits, and we get a few audits in CDCR, and I think one of the things that we do see, there are times that there's a disagreement with the auditor. Within the 60 days or 30 days, is there time built in to resolve any disagreements, to not eat into the necessary timeframes to resolve them?
That's a great question. Going back to the technical assistance piece of that, what we really hope to enhance in this process is that availability of the BSCC staff to be able to offer and provide technical assistance. And in my experience, most of those issues are worked out either on site because, you know, somebody from the sheriff's administration is there and engaging and identifying issues. So they more often than not can have those disagreements or discussions at that time. More often than not, they are resolved before the final inspection report is issued. But I think that's a really good point for us to keep in mind as part of our process or timeframes to make sure that we have time to resolve those differences.
Some of the most common disagreements are on the physical plant and differences between the county's engineers or the county's infrastructure specialists and the boards, and there'll be a disagreement. And I just don't want to put a sheriff in a situation to where, you know, there's clearly a difference of opinion and we want to do the right thing in the end. Then the second part is the scheduling of the inspections. And I know, Aaron, you want to say something, but the scheduling of the inspections, I know got a lot of ground to cover. And I know that the boards, county boards of supervisors want to have things in front of them during their budget cycles. You know, is that taken into consideration that inspections will happen to allow sheriffs to go to the board at the proper time to make the proper funding requests?
Hadn't thought about that specifically. We have a, oh, go ahead, Linda.
I actually had that thought, and one of the things that I would correct in this agenda item, as you read, that I reckoned with is the notification of the Superior Court, of the CAO, of the grand jury, not in part two of the process, but as during the 60-day, if they're non-compliant at 60 days, I think the notification should go out then. Because it does not, the cycle does not often or always match what a budget cycle a county may have. And so I think we should continue notice of all parties when we're at that 60-day non-compliance portion of the process. And that may be something that in this item that we take another look at. The other thing, a sheriff can say no to us. I don't agree. Thank you for your opinion. Thank you for your report. And they can say no. But they have to now come in and say no in here. And this board will address it as a body. And I think that is something overdue. The governor definitely feels it's overdue. And that transparency will certainly make a difference in some of those conversations, and it should. So that's where we're heading. You know, the growth of staffing is out there as an outlying question, and, you know, we'll have to look at how that falls out. But there are a lot of moving parts in this process. As we talk about this agenda item specifically, there is an executive steering committee looking hard at the adult regulation revision process, which is done every 2 years. There will be conversations and consideration about medical and mental health, segregation, physical plants, program and services, safe release of inmates, depending on what time of day they're released, the type of temporary housing that is offered out there in these 550-plus facilities, minors that may be detained in adult arena, environmental health, work groups. So there's a number of things, a huge amount of things, and a huge amount of work groups looking at these items. And I think as we move forward, it's an evolutionary process. The regs are very different from the regs of 20 years ago, and I expect this year they'll make some dramatic changes again. So I'm pleased the two are intersecting. I think we'll do really good work on that. I think we're also going to take a hard look at data collection and what it is we want to look at and how that moves forward. We're going to talk about that later in the meeting. So big bite of the apple right now. Katie, I know you're ready to speak.
I just wanted to circle back to Mr. Steinhardt's question. I think the process absolutely has to build in a way for the board to either direct staff or staff to recommend to the board that new issues have come to light that may be of concern. So while we didn't put it in this outline for today, I think Mr. Steinhardt asks a really important question. If through media coverage or any other way an issue of concern comes up about County XYZ, then we can, on our own initiative already, say we better send an inspector out or a board member at these. So this will become a regular agenda item. Here are all the new jail inspection updates, and then board members may say, hey, we'd like you to go out and visit based on some other, concern. For sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Chair,
Yes.
if we could add to the recommendation and actions needed, direct staff to conduct analysis of staff and funding required to adequately address the inspection and the reports, including emergency situations that might arise in the field,
Under the recommendations section?
under the
Okay.
recommendations.
All right.
Sure, you anticipate having to add staff to do this?
Well, we're hopeful.
I'm sure it's going to be funded
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to go right back to my earlier statement. It's an evolutionary process, and this is a good beginning. I think it.
No, I think this board would be supportive of that too. I mean, to do it properly, you're going to need staff. You can't just have one person blow in and try to do something in a week. It's going to be, be garbage in, garbage out. We want it to be meaningful.
Yeah, and I think, the suggestion of the sort of information that goes out to boards and grand juries and people that have purse strings on a local level is meaningful also. So lots of good information here. Looking to anybody else on the board that wants to add anything. Looking now to a public comments section. Allison, don't go too far away.
We have 3 public comments. If I could have them line up, that would be Miguel Garcia, Dominic Nong, and Renee Menard.
And prior to those public comments, and if you wouldn't mind getting yourself in a queue here, that would be great. I would say to the body and to anybody listening that the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice has provided us a letter. We received it this morning. It is signed by Brian Goldstein, and all members of the board have received and read that correspondence.
It's dated yesterday,
Yeah.
February 12th.
Yeah, I think we got it this morning, though, didn't we?
Right.
Or,
Right at 9:48 PM last night, and printed this morning.
thank you. So as timely as could be. Appreciate that. If you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record?
Good morning, members. My name is Miguel Garcia. I'm the policy coordinator with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and thank you for taking the time to look into the jail inspection process. From my perspective, and we're just reviewing it, I think community input is important. I understand that the June 11th and 12th meeting will be focused on reviewing the document and seeing how changes could be made. I appreciate the insight that the concerns that this is a conceptual plan, as well when conceptualism occurs, it is important to involve inclusivity with the community involved in these institutions. So I just please take consideration in reaching out to your community members, your constituents, and having them be informed about this next meeting will be really appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dominique Nong from the Children's Defense Fund, California. When California's highest leaders appointed you to serve on this board,
They entrusted each of you with many awesome responsibilities, including the duty to do everything within your power to ensure that incarcerated individuals and staff of county facilities are protected from neglect, abuse, trauma, and violence. Today, staff is asking you to approve a conceptual plan developed to remedy some of the deficiencies in the agency's inspections process that have allowed egregious assaults to the safety and well-being of those living and working inside county facilities. Children's Defense Fund California is asking you to direct staff to engage with stakeholders, particularly those directly impacted by local incarceration and organizations experienced in inspecting facilities, to explore and propose additional ways to make inspections more robust and reports more accessible and therefore conducive to making needed changes. Reports and technical assistance are only as effective as the preceding inspections. There's clear evidence that inspections need to be more robust. The LA County Office of Inspector General and media have documented shocking use of chemical spray in juvenile facilities that led the county to bring criminal charges against probation officers and to vote to eliminate the use of chemical spray. All this while the 2016 and 2018 local report made no mention of the intolerable behavior taking place. We also recommend that you ask staff to propose changes to the content and format of the final inspection reports. The need for this is exemplified by the fact that the agency's report for Kern County jails from 2016 to 18 cycle submitted to county officials and the legislature is nearly indecipherable. The report simply lists the number of the standards being violated and the article name. Listing Standard 1272, Article Beddings and Linens, in no way conveys the grim realities of Kern's long-term use of safety rooms where individuals slept on yoga mats rather than mattresses. We ask you today to fully exercise your leadership, vision, experience, and power to protect our loved ones living and working in county facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique.
Renee Menard with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. I want to thank the staff for taking the time to make sure all the board members had the letter today and for accommodating that this morning. I know that there was a brief mention about CJ's letter from one of my colleagues, and I just want to expand on both the points made in our letter as well as the points made by some of our other community members today. So in particular, we have very serious concerns about the speed at which we're moving with the revisions process, or the revisions to the inspections process. The way that it appears at this point is that these revisions are very minimal and wouldn't make meaningful changes to address the concerns that have come up, particularly exposed by the media in recent months. As Dominique Nong had mentioned, these issues that have come up with Kern County, Los Angeles County, and others really aren't being presented to the board, and we appreciate the recognition that the board does need to hear of concerns as they come up with violations. But beyond that, we need to have a more robust system of the inspections process and the oversight that the BSEC can administer. And it doesn't appear at this point that the minimal changes would fully address community concerns. So the request that I would have and that CJ would have at this point is that the board take an opportunity to have more community input beyond the meetings in June. As we can understand, if this moves forward internally with minimal opportunity for the community to engage except at that meeting, we have concerns that we won't have the insights of both adult facilities, stakeholders, as well as those on the juvenile side. If this is going to impact juvenile facilities, there is a wide network of organizations and members of the community that need to be engaged through the process actively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the speaker?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'm sorry, Renee, I didn't catch your last name.
Oh, Menard.
Menard? Thank you for appearing this morning. I just note that we've heard now, I think, 3 speakers in a row all suggest, I think in some way or another, greater opportunity for community engagement. Is there anything specific? I can't speak on behalf of the board, but speaking for myself, I'm open to what more we can do within limits. I think we have to balance it between wanting to get something done and not delaying, and hearing from staff that, if we have a inspection cycle coming up in July, certainly we want, if possible, to try to implement changes for that cycle. Perhaps that could be changed, I don't know. But what more can we do beyond, today is a public meeting, obviously. We take steps to make this available to the public. There's going to be a follow-up in June that we all heard about. What more can we do if you've got specifics?
I appreciate that. I, as a first point, would say that I have concerns about the approval of this preliminary plan. I think that it sets forth the concept that the decisions made by the board at the June meeting will be within alignment with this preliminary plan that wasn't developed with community input. So I think that if this issue is going to be visited at the board meeting in June, this may be an opportunity for us to delay approving this preliminary plan in order to allow for broader community input before setting that foundation. That's a first recommendation I would have, particularly recognizing that it will impact both the adult facilities and the juvenile facilities if it's replicated as it's intended to do so. The second aspect I would just mention, and I am a bit hesitant to speak for the community about exactly the process that would be best for folks, but I do think that beyond in-person meetings that occur here, there is a real opportunity for the staff to engage in meetings, in community stakeholder gatherings in various communities, either in person or digitally, to allow opportunities to engage with community groups across the state outside of the board meetings.
And if I might take the liberty of sort of addressing this on the fly, I think that what we're seeing here is a framework that we hope to get in place and move forward. And I don't think that prohibits additional input and transparency and public comment on the process as it goes forward. I would be disappointed if we didn't move this agenda item forward and then knowing, and we've said it repeatedly in this meeting, that it is a work in progress and that it will change and modulate based on, you know, the climate between now and June and even in the aftermath, to be honest. I think it's something that we bears immediate action and, yes, maybe tweaks, changes, and the guidance of the community. I don't think we're at all concerned about that input. I think we welcome that, but we also know that we have to begin. It's been 5 weeks since the governor's budget came out. We certainly know the urgency that the governor has in terms of drawing a line in the sand and moving on it. And I don't think involvement and transparency prohibits that happening today and us opening some community conversations as we move forward. And I commit to that as the board chair, and I think the board would support that.
Comment on that? Yeah, I'd agree that it almost sends the wrong message to table this and toss it out for today. There's a need for action, and this is action taken as a concept and a framework that in no way stands in the way of some process for designing how community input can be facilitated in the future. So I would like to see this go forward, but with an advisory to the staff to come up with methodologies. I mean, Lee, you said, you know, what exactly does community input mean? Maybe it means some ongoing process for members of the community to flag conditions issues that need inspection that nobody else is paying attention to or isn't in the normal cycle. Or maybe it means something else in terms of designing the final process. But I'm sure that the staff can come up with sort of a greater range of choices that meet that. And secondly, I heard the comment about the nature of the reports and how it was all sort of couched in numbers and code references. And, you know, I'm a big fan of plain English. So I think if the report says, you know, there's a problem with the bedding, it should go ahead and say people are sleeping on the floors,
totally
you know? So let's take that into account as well.
I think those were great suggestions. And interestingly enough, all three of our speakers today, and if my memory serves me correct, have been intricately involved in various other efforts that we've had here at the BSCC and served on executive steering committees, and we have absolutely benefited from that input. We do not plan on shying away from that. And so as we move quickly to get this agenda item going, I hope that's not communicated in any fashion that we intend to prohibit community involvement engagement.
Thank you, and I look forward, if the board decides that it's the case, that we can see from staff members and from the BSCC a process in which community members can be engaged actively beyond the general process that we see here at the board meeting.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Anything else from the board?
Yeah, I just want to say, I appreciate the comments from all the speakers today, but I also think that the staff, I see that the process that's been set forth by BSCC is very good and very consistent with that. I appreciate the fact that staff have moved quickly on this, that we're here talking about it. I support us moving this forward. And I think building in this nice, multi-month timeline where we're going to come back to it in June is precisely there so that, we've put the public on notice, we've put the community and said, we've given this good opportunity for people to engage and take a look at these public materials, give us input, show up. Perhaps we'll hear about other ways we can engage, but I think it's, this two-prong approach. We're not just foisting it on the public today, voting on it today, and moving it out the door. We're kind of noticing everyone, giving people plenty of time to digest it, and I think it's the right approach. So I appreciate staff working quickly to be responsive.
I move that we move forward.
Okay, was there an additional
Yes.
recommendation added to this?
Yes, if I may, Madam Chair. So Chief Mills suggested that we add a recommendation to direct staff to conduct an analysis of the funding and staffing needed to complete the enhanced inspection process, including addressing emergency issues. That was the sense of it.
Yes.
And if I may, I'd like to suggest that the board also take a formal action today to ask the staff to seek input from the community on this process. I think that would be helpful too.
Agreed. Okay, so as it stands now, we have the written recommendation and 2 oral recommendations. Is everybody on the board clear about what they are? Asking for a motion?
Already
I have a
moved.
motion. Excuse me for ignoring you, but yes, I got you
I'm
now,
used to
Chief
it.
Mills. It's okay. Feel good about that. And we have a second from Sheriff Groden. All in favor of the motion as it stands?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Seeing none, the motion carries. Super good work, super important work. I really think this is a great time for the board to wrap their arms around a very, very significant issue throughout the state. And I appreciate all of your work and the comments from the audience. All right, Allison.
Thank
You may sit down until we find something else you need to do. Moving to item D, the Calvic. Pauline?
And before we begin this item, Madam Chair, I'd look to Mr. Branco and Ms. Kumpion to excuse themselves.
You're going to have an absentee issue if you keep leaving.
As Mr. Branco sits on the board of a community-based organization, Ms. Kumpion works for one as well that might apply for CalVIP funding, and we'd ask for their recusal.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name's Colleen Curtin. I'm a field representative in the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs Division, and I'm here today to present Agenda Item D. This agenda item requests board approval to release a request for proposals for the California Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant, also known as CalVIP, as recommended by its Executive Steering Committee. The proposed RFP can be found in Attachment D1, and a list of the individuals that served on the Executive Steering Committee can be found in Attachment D4. I want to note that Board Member Chief Andy Mills served as chair of the CalVIP ESC. In order to provide some important context about the grant, I want to first share some of the history on the grant. This grant first appeared in the state budget in fiscal year 07-08 and was named the California Gang Reduction Intervention and Prevention Grant, or CalGRIP. The grant was funded and has been funded at $9 million annually with an individual award cap of $500,000. Up until fiscal year 17-18, The grant was open to cities, California cities, which were required to pass through a minimum of 50% of their grant funds to one or more community-based organizations. With the passage of the 17-18 state budget, the exclusive focus on gangs was lifted and the name of the grant was changed to reflect a more broad focus on violence. That same year, eligibility to apply for the grant was extended to community-based organizations who could now apply directly to the grant in addition to cities. The fiscal year 19-20 budget, current year, brought a one-time infusion of $21 million, bringing the total appropriation for the grant now to $30 million. Also this year, there was a separate piece of legislation tied to the grant, Assembly Bill 1603, which I will discuss in a moment. This bill brought additional changes to funding and eligibility requirements. Of the $30 million now available for CalVIP, $1 million will go to the City of Los Angeles as a non-competitive award. This set aside appears in statute and has appeared in statute since the grant's inception. The Budget Act this year stipulates that $3 million will be set aside for small cities, defined as cities with populations of 40,000 or less. And this language is new this year. 5% of the grant funds, or $1.5 million, may be retained by the BSCC for administering the program. And I want to point out that BSCC intends to use a portion of this amount to solicit an outside evaluator to assist us with monitoring and reporting of outcomes at the conclusion of this grant. That leaves $24.5 million available for all other applicants, and this will include cities that are disproportionately impacted by violence and the CBOs that serve them. And I'll talk about eligibility specifics in a moment. Back to Assembly Bill 1603, also known as the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. This bill codified the CalVIP grant, adding it to penal code, and brought other significant changes. First of all, it tripled the award cap that an individual grantee can request, raising the cap up to $1.5 million. For purposes of eligibility, it defined disproportionately impacted by violence. This is important because it has the impact of limiting the number of cities that can apply. Prior to this year, all cities could apply for CalVIP. This bill is going to limit that eligibility to certain cities, which I'll talk about in a moment. It narrowed the purpose of the grant as well to focus on specifically on violence reduction initiatives that target individuals who are at highest risk of perpetrating or being victimized by violence. Specifically, AB 1603 states that grant funds must be used to support, expand, or replicate evidence-based violence reduction initiatives. So grantees may use these funds to support an existing program or to start a new program. Some of the examples mentioned in 1603 include evidence-based street outreach, focused deterrence, also known as ceasefire, and hospital-based intervention programs. And I want to note here that the Executive Steering Committee spent some time discussing these three strategies because they did appear in statute, discussing whether or not to limit applicants to these three strategies or to otherwise incentivize the use of these strategies. But in the end, the group decided that it was more important to leave some discretion to applicants to select an evidence-informed strategy that best fits the need of their community. So there are three ways a city can meet the eligibility criteria of being disproportionately impacted by violence. The first two ways were defined in statute. The third way was developed by the Executive Steering Committee. The first way a city can become eligible is cities that experienced 20 or more homicides in 2 of the 3 years preceding this grant process. And our data shows that there are 14 cities that met that definition listed on the slide here. Those 14 cities will be eligible to apply. Secondly, a city that experienced 10 homicides or more and had a homicide rate that was 50% above the state's homicide rate for 2 of the 3 preceding years also qualifies to apply. We found an additional 6 cities met that criteria, and they're listed on the slide here. The third definition was called out in statute as, quote, otherwise demonstrates a unique and compelling need for additional resources to address the impact of homicides, shootings, and aggravated assaults. The Executive Steering Committee spent some time discussing what might constitute a unique and compelling need and decided that it was not something they wanted to leave to individual raters to decide during the rating process. Instead, after examining available DOJ crime data, the ESC decided that a city that had experienced 7 homicides and had a homicide rate that was 25% above the state homicide rate could also apply. That added an additional 9 cities to the eligible list for a total of 29 cities. Those 29 cities are shown in Table 1 of your board report. And I want to note that these 29 cities and any community-based organizations that serve the residents of these cities are eligible to apply. Cities and CBOs apply independently for this grant. There's no limit on the number of eligible CBOs within a city that may apply. I want to point that out. In addition to the 29 cities I just mentioned, there is an additional group of small cities that may apply. As I mentioned earlier, the Budget Act stipulates that $3 million be set aside with cities' population of 40,000 or less. There are 274 cities in the state that have a population of 40,000 or less, so the Executive Steering Committee decided to layer need criteria onto that, onto those cities. To that end, the ESC decided that small cities that appeared in the top 5% statewide for one or more of 3 crimes designated as violent, to include homicide, aggravated assault, and robbery, averaged over the 3 preceding years, would be eligible. That means that 66 small cities are eligible to apply, and those are shown in Table 2. For this category, CBOs are not eligible, only the cities. So I want to show here that the funding then, the eligibility categories are narrowed to 3 as shown on the table on this slide. This table appears in the RFP. The 29 cities that met the criteria for disproportionately impacted by violence may apply in Category 1. Any CBOs that serve the residents of those cities may apply under Category 2, and those 66 small cities mentioned earlier may apply under Category 3. The second column here shows the amount for which those applicants may apply. Categories 1 and 2 may apply for up to the full amount of $1.5 million, and the 66 small cities may apply for up to $600,000. The third column shows how the CalVIP funds will be allocated. So taking away the $3 million available for small cities left $24.5 million. The ESC decided to split that amount evenly between cities and CBOs. This has the impact that cities will compete against cities, CBOs will compete against CBOs, and small cities will compete against small cities. There's a special condition for cities. I mentioned it earlier. Cities must pass through 50% of their grant funds to 1 or more community-based organizations. And then new this year with the passage of 1603, cities can also meet that pass-through by passing through to a public agency or department primarily dedicated to community safety or violence prevention, but not law enforcement. That second bullet, again, came with the passage of AB 1603. And an example of the type of public agency that might meet this requirement would be a city office of violence prevention or an office of community safety, et cetera. Couple other requirements of which the board should be aware. All grantees, whether a city or a CBO, must meet a 100% match contribution. That is in statute. This match can be cash or in-kind or a combination of both, and this match requirement has always been a part of the CalVIP grant. All grantees will be required to submit quarterly progress reports. All grantees will be required to submit a final evaluation report. And we've added a new requirement. It does not appear in the draft RFP. It was added very recently. And this new requirement will stipulate that all grantees be required to retain a certified public accountant to conduct a financial audit at the end of their grant. And we will allow applicants to allocate up to $25,000 for that audit. The grant period will be 3 years, beginning on July 1, 2020, and ending June 30th, 2023. There will, however, be an additional 6 months built into the contract to allow grantees to finalize their data collection and evaluation efforts and submit a final report and submit their financial audit. The rating factors developed by the Executive Steering Committee on which the applications will be rated appear here. There are 5. description of community need, project description, organizational capacity and coordination, project evaluation and monitoring, and budget. The ESC, as you see on the slide, assigned a corresponding weight value to each rating factor to reflect their rating factor's importance within their overall rating structure. The ESC also decided that an applicant must achieve a minimum score of 50% to be eligible to apply. This last slide shows key dates associated with the RFP. Once the RFP is released, prospective applicants will have 8 weeks to complete their proposals with a due date of April 10th. To better prepare potential applicants, the SCC will hold 2 bidders conferences, one in Los Angeles on March 3rd, one in Sacramento on March 6th. We will do our best to walk prospective applicants through the RFP and answer questions about the RFP. The ESC will rate the proposals starting in late April and continue through May, and funding recommendations will be presented to the board at its June meeting. This concludes my report. I want to thank all of the members of the Executive Steering Committee, and a special thank you to Chief Mills for his first time serving as chair. Thank you for your support and commitment and leading us through some difficult discussions. And I will close by recommending that the board approve the release of the CalVIP RFP. Are there any questions?
If I can just comment real quickly. Colleen and Ricardo, thank you so much. You all did just a phenomenal job being organized and being very respectful of everybody's time and walking people through the processes that to come up with this. I had to be honest, in the first couple hours, I thought, oh my gosh, what a mess. We're never going to make it. But you actually used the process to really be effective and to come up with a phenomenal product. So thank you so much for all your work. I particularly want to point out how open this was to the public. Both times it was in a location where anybody from the public could come and attend and give their input, and you regularly sought the input from community members and CBOs that were there. And people did take you up on that and came and were present and had a very good, strong voice. So thank you so much for the hard work for both of you and your staff.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you. I know it's, we always enjoy board members who tackle their first executive steering committee because they don't know what they're getting into. We're proud that you're still smiling at us. It is a great deal of work. Oh, I apologize. It's a great deal of work and effort, and you're only halfway through it, so no thank you note necessary at this point. Appreciate that. I'm looking now to the public. Any comments on this matter?
We do not have any public comment.
Seeing none. Back to the board. Any further discussion? Looking for a motion?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Recognizing that Board Member Cupiano and Barranco are out of the room. Motion carries, and thank you, Colleen, for all of your hard work, Ricardo, your staff, great job. And now we'll invite these 2 board members seem to be missing a lot. There's an attendance issue we're going to discuss. Are we going to make them leave the room in Prop 64 too?
It would be their choice. This one's a little bit different in as much as, and I can't remember. Do we have a mandatory pass-through?
Yeah. Okay, so we're now on to item E, Prop 64, council.
Well, again, I would invite folks, the eligible entities for these grants are, I just got a thumbs up sign from Sheriff Groudon, I think, so.
I'm out of here.
He's out. Sheriff Groudon will be recusing himself. Apparently, Lassen has not banned the cultivation.
Well, they can't decide what they want.
They can't decide what they want to do. In the event that marijuana will be available for sale and cultivation in Lassen County, Sheriff Groudon is excusing himself. I would look to anyone, other members who might want to, if their agencies or employment agencies would be seeking this funds. You know, this one's one where I would look to you as to whether or not you think your CBO would be applying for this money. You would doubt it. I think it would be safe for you to stay. I think you would be okay. And likewise, Ms. Kupion, I know you're new at this. I don't know whether or not ARC would be interested in applying for this money as a partner with another entity or not.
You're good, I think we're good. You can take that. Okay. She's-
Oh, she has a plane to catch, so
She
we
has
don't
a
even
plane
have
to
to
catch.
answer that question,
We
so
gave
she
her-
will be excusing herself.
She's not being kicked out of the room, she's leaving voluntarily.
I know this looks bad.
Yeah, yeah. Well, given your 12 hours notice before the appointment, we allow that. Unlike, Sheriff Groudon's big grin on his face when he left, so, bye, thank you, thank you. Okay, Helene, how are you?
I'm
Where'd
well.
we go?
and Now, back to the few.
Yes, and I'm, knowing a lot about this, I'm gonna be right back. Okay.
Oh, great, leaving my chair. Whatever I said, I take back. Okay, so, good morning. Madam Chair, before you leave, good morning, and members of the board. My name is Helene Zettner. I'm a field representative with the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs here at the BSCC, and I'm before you presenting item E. This agenda item requests the board's approval to release the proposed request for proposals, or RFP, provided for you today in attachment E1 for the Proposition 64 Public Health and Safety Grant Program. In November of 2016, Proposition 64, also known as the Control, Regulate, and Tax Adult Use of Marijuana Act, was passed by the voters of California. This act legalized the recreational use of cannabis for those over the age of 21 and established laws to regulate the cultivation, distribution, sale, and use of cannabis. A portion of tax revenue generated by the act has been set aside for local grant projects to promote public health and safety, as well as mitigating impacts due to the legalization of cannabis. At the board meeting last July, this body appointed Board Chair Linda Penner as the Executive Steering Committee Chair and authorized BSCC staff to work with her to establish an ESC membership, which would oversee the grant development process. And the ESC roster is available and provided to you in attachment E2. This is normally where I would thank my chair for all the hard work, facilitation, and guidance to the ESC process, but you'll have to tell her that I did that when she comes back. But I'd also like to thank the ESC members that gave up their time and expertise as the process so far, and actually one of the members is here today, Renee Munart. So I'd like to personally thank her for joining that process and getting ready for the next set of process. The ESC met 3 times between October and November of 2019 to develop key concepts, criteria, and decisions which are before you today within the Prop 64 Grant Program RFP. This document represents the BSCC's first solicitation for competitive funds under Prop 64. It is anticipated the BSCC will be given approximately $44 million in tax revenues for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. Given the uniqueness of this new grant program under the BSCC, separate decisions for these new monies will be based on lessons learned and outcomes from this RFP. Revenue and Tax Code attachment, oops. There we go, sorry. Revenue and Tax Code, which is your attachment E3, states the BSCC will provide grant funds to local governments that assist with law enforcement, fire protection, and other local programming to address public health and safety associated with the implementation of the Act. In addition, the code states that the board shall not make any grants to local governments which have banned the cultivation, including personal cultivation, or retail sale of cannabis or cannabis products. And as Aaron mentioned previously, that the eligibility for this funding is a bit complicated. So I'd like to go through, for the purposes of this RFP, the definitions that we have. So ban the cultivation means to prohibit or bar by a local government all indoor commercial cultivation, indoor personal cultivation, outdoor commercial cultivation, or outdoor personal cultivation. Therefore, if a jurisdiction prohibits any of the above, they are not eligible for funding. The second ban definition for the purposes of this RFP is ban the retail sale, which means a local government has not prohibited the local establishment or local operation of any and or all licensed businesses, and businesses must be allowed to have a brick and mortar location within the local government's jurisdiction. As part of this RFP, there are 4 project purpose areas that the ESC discussed to have as eligible activities within the program. The first PPA is youth development, youth prevention, and intervention. This is a mandatory component, and all applicants are required to budget a minimum of 10% of their requested grant funds for this area. The second is public health, the third, public safety, and the fourth, environmental impacts. All eligible applicants may choose to focus solely on PPA 1, the youth development, youth prevention, and intervention, or may choose any combination of the project purpose areas for their project. For the grant funding, the total funding for the Prop 64 grant, local grants are $24.7 million. A maximum of $1 million may be requested by any single eligible applicant. A maximum of $2 million may be requested by a collaborative application composed of 2 or more eligible local governments. Only one application may be submitted by a jurisdiction. Grant projects will be funded for 3 years, beginning July 1, 2020. And as part of the BSCC's administration of this grant, up to $25,000 of the applicant's requested funds will be allocated for a post-grant financial audit, similar to the addition in CalVIP grant. All grant project components and activities must have a nexus to the intent of Prop 64 by addressing local impacts due to the legalization of cannabis. The ESC determined that to provide as much equity as possible for different sized local governments to receive grants and to have jurisdictions compete only with other like-sized jurisdictions, available monies would be awarded within the 4 categories listed before you. And these categories are defined by Department of Finance population estimate for 2019, which you can find in Appendix H of the actual RFP. Small counties and those cities within those counties will compete for 20% of the total Prop 64 funds that are available, or in other words, $4.940,000. Medium counties and all cities within those counties will also compete for a separate 20%. Large counties and all cities within those counties will compete again for a 20% of the total funds. And then the remaining 40%, which is $9,880,000, will be awarded to the highest rated proposals regardless of the county size category that did not receive an award under the small, medium, and large county size funding categories. In addition, to be considered for funding, an application must score at least 50% of the 200 total available points in the rating criteria, which is a minimum of 100 points. This concludes my presentation. It is my recommendation that the board approve and authorize the release of this first solicitation of Prop 64 funds in the form of the RFP before you, as recommended by the ESC. Does anyone have any questions?
We do not have public comment.
The revenue.
We look forward, I apologize, darn it. That's the second time he's had to sneak up here. Anyway, thank you for all your hard work. It's a good product.
Great. And to be noted, I did thank my chair.
Oh, I was out of the room?
Yes, you were out of the room.
I'm so shy I left before the compliments started. Okay, looking to the board for a motion in a second.
So moved to release the.
Thank you. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Let the record reflect Sheriff Groudon and Chief Mills were out of the room during this process, and we'll invite them back in. I know you're waiting, Colleen. We're just waiting for our participants to resurface. Welcome back. We're moving now to item F, the Adult Reentry Program Rehab of an Existing Property, funding approval.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Colleen Stoner. I'm a field representative with the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs. Agenda item F is an action item requesting the approval of the funding recommendation made by the scoring committee of the third component of the Adult Reentry Grant Program, the rehabilitation of existing property and buildings. The recommendation is to fully award the sole applicant, Epidaurus DBA Amity Foundation of Los Angeles, totaling $5 million. Senate Bill 840, Budget Act of 2018, established the Adult Reentry Grant Program, which appropriated $50 million to support offenders who were formerly incarcerated in state prison. The BSCC is to award these funds through a competitive bid process to community-based organizations. Pursuant to Senate Bill 840, the funding is to be distributed to three main components of the program as follows. $25 million is to be allocated for rental assistance. $9.35 million is to support warm handoff and reentry services for people transitioning from prison to communities, and $15 million for the rehabilitation of existing property or buildings for housing people released from prison. As we began the development process for these three components, we learned that the rehabilitation of existing property and buildings component was particularly impacted by state housing laws and regulations, and further evaluation and research was needed to determine how best to respond to potential responsibilities and compliance issues by the BSCC. For this reason, this third component was set aside while work continued separately on the first two components. You may recall that the competitive bid process for the rental assistance and the warm handoff reentry services concluded back in July 11th, 2019, when the board approved a total of 69 awards for these two components. On that same date, the board approved the grant development process and approved that we begin the grant award process for the third and final component, rehabilitation of existing property and buildings. The board authorized staff to develop the RFP and to convene a scoring committee to read and rate and develop funding recommendations to the board. Board Chair Linda Penner was appointed to chair this committee. Upon completion, the RFP was posted to the BSCC website for a 30-day public comment period, and staff returned to the board on September 12th for approval to release it to the field. And that's attachment 6 in your board packet. Key elements of the grant included that, as I mentioned, applicants had to be CBOs that have a 501c3 status. In other words, they're nonprofits. And applicants could apply for from $3 million up to a maximum of $5 million. A cash match of 20% of the grant award is required. Applicants have to provide housing services to homeless persons or at risk of being homeless for a minimum of 3 years prior to applying for the funding. The grant funds can be used solely for rehabilitating property or buildings to house formerly incarcerated individuals from state prison. The type of housing can include transitional housing, permanent housing, and safe haven housing. After the completion of the rehabbing project, applicants must agree to house individuals formerly incarcerated in state prison at their project site up until the end of the grant period, which will run to January 20th of 2035. Applicants have to own and hold title to the property in fee simple that is proposed to be rehabilitated. In order to receive the funding, applicants must first execute and deliver a promissory note in the amount of the grant award and secure it by a deed of trust on the property, naming the BSCC as the beneficiary. Projects also cannot result in the displacement of tenants or businesses, and the project can have no significant impact on the environment and are statutorily or categorically exempt from the California Environment Quality Act, that's CEQA process. A draft of a notice of exemption has been developed by the BSCC Council and is included in your packet as F7, which, if approved, will be the document used to file a CEQA exemption for the proposed grantee with the Office of Planning and Research. The scoring committee convened on November 20th, 2019 to read and rate the single proposal submitted to BSCC. It is forwarded to the board today with a recommendation to award a full $5 million in funding to the Amity Foundation for the rehabilitation of a 4-story former hotel in downtown Los Angeles. This facility is currently licensed to house 184 individuals. 100% of the bed space will be used to serve the target population. This facility provides residential treatment for individuals with a substance use disorder, as well as an array of reentry services designed to help participants successfully reenter the community from prison and reduce recidivism. If awarded, the Amity Foundation project would use the grant funds to rehabilitate 69 rooms, including bedrooms, bathrooms, replacement of all existing plumbing, mechanical, electrical systems, replacement of all doors and windows, replacement of their elevator, improvements to their fire system, their fire alarm system, and we'll have a design and a build-out of 3 bedrooms and a community restroom. The renovations will allow an additional 26 new beds, making the total bed space available 210. This renovation would also impact all 4 floors of the building and include HVAC improvements throughout the building and upgrades of the showers and sewer lines and waste lines and supply lines. Amity's total estimated project cost is a little over $9 million. In addition to the $5 million in BSCC funds, Amity has received $1.5 million in HUD funding, which will be used and dedicated to this project. Amity will cover the remaining $2.5 million from their capital budget over the course of the next 3 years. As a result of the BSCC receiving only 1 qualified bid for the rehabilitation of existing property or buildings, the remaining $10 million that have been available for this component will revert to the general fund. So at this time, on behalf of the Adult Reentry Grant Program Scoring Committee, staff recommends the board take the following actions. Fully fund the proposal for Epidaurus, DBA Amity Foundation, and approve the draft notice of exemption and direct staff to finalize the notice of exemption and file it with the Office of Planning and Research. I'm happy to address any questions.
No public comment.
Moving to the board for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? The record reflects. CDCR abstained from the motion. Motion carried. All right, on to item G.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm Casey Wormuth. I'll be presenting agenda item G. This agenda item requests approval of the grant proposal evaluation process provided in your meeting materials as attachment G1. If approved, this item also requests authorization for staff to follow the process for all executive steering committees for grant development moving forward, including those currently convened and in the process of grant development. So I'll begin with why a grant proposal evaluation process is necessary. A responsibility of the BSCC is to award competitive grant funds to local entities for projects designed to reduce justice system involvement through intervention, education, and prevention strategies. In support of this responsibility, the BSCC developed a process by which grant proposals are evaluated to ensure the awards are based on the strength of the proposal and the excellence of the proposed projects. The goal of this process is to provide a reliable, valid, and fair method for ranking proposals according to merit. It also provides comparable treatment for all proposals. Combining these two elements, we can ensure that the best proposals are selected and applicants feel that they have been treated fairly. This process has been in place for a while now here at the BSCC. So why am I here before you today? Over the years, there have been some changes that have impacted this process. The change that has had the greatest impact is the increase in the number of proposals that we receive in response to RFPs. So for example, in 2017, we received 58 proposals for the Prop 47 grant, and we received 120 proposals for the CalVIP grant. In 2018, we received 147 proposals for the Adult Reentry Grant. Last year, we received 43 proposals for Prop 47 and 44 for the Youth Reinvestment Grant. So far, we have received 99 letters of intent for the Youth Reinvestment Grant currently in progress. So we anticipate this trend will continue into the future. This increase in the number of proposals received has impacted the process in two ways. First, it becomes challenging for the ESC members to evaluate each proposal received due to the time commitment required. We estimate a thorough review takes an hour to an hour and a half for each proposal. So just 43 proposals becomes daunting. Now imagine 120 or 147. Second, this high number of proposals may impact the review quality, even if ESC members do manage to review them all. And it's a daunting task that likely doesn't provide equitable and fair consideration for the proposals and the time commitment that those applicants put into those proposals. And in addition to this increase, there's also been an increase in the amount of grant funding available. Last year, there was $96 million available for Prop 47 funding. Prop 64 has $24 million available, and CalVIP, $27 million available. So the stakes are high, not only for applicants, but also for the BSCC to provide a valid, fair process that is as impartial as possible. With these changes in mind, the BSCC reviewed all aspects of the process. Following this review, key modifications are proposed. This includes the addition of the multiple panel rating process. I do know that this modification has already been implemented, but it is now included in the process document. We also propose eliminating the discussion of ratings, and we are seeking approval of this modification today. And we also recommend a technical change regarding the calculation of proposal scores when there is a missing rater. Again, this is a modification we are requesting today. And before I jump into the details of these recommendations, I'll brief you on how these came to be. We came to each of these recommendations after extensive analysis and debate, Individuals included involved BSCC research staff who have an education and background in psychological measurement. We consulted with an industrial psychologist, Dr. Larry Myers, who is a professor in the graduate program at California State University, Sacramento. Dr. Myers has extensive experience in psychological measurement and the proper execution of panel processes. We considered input from ESC members who have participated in the grant proposal evaluation process, some of whom have done so in several grant cycles and across various different grants. We also convened a focus group in January specifically regarding the recommendation to eliminate the discussion of ratings. So I'd like to thank Chair Linda Penner and Mr. Steinhardt for their participation in that focus group. Other members included Michelle Brown, Chief Probation Officer San Bernardino and former board member, Reverend Dr. Charles Dorsey of the Dorsey Group and a CalVIP ESC member, and Peter LaValle, a retired nonprofit youth program administrator and ESC member for the Tribal Youth Diversion Grant. The first proposed modification I'll describe is the multiple panel rating process. For this process, subsets of ESC members are assigned to different panels, and each panel reads and evaluates a smaller but representative sample of proposals. In addition, a small subset of proposals is a common across all panels for the purpose of evaluating any possible panel differences that may occur. Further, standardized scores are used to overcome any panel differences. This multiple panel process is necessary to ensure that the hours of service required by ESC members is manageable while still providing for fair and equitable consideration of the proposals. Current board members and Chair Penner have participated in this process. It has been used successfully for 5 grants. Would any of those who have participated in this process like to make a comment regarding this modification?
We support it.
Support it. All right. All right. So the next modification I'll describe is eliminating the discussion of ratings, but it first requires some background information. Up until now, once ESC members have completed their individual evaluation of their assigned proposals, the process has called for them to meet in person over a period of 1 or 2 days. During this ESC meeting, the members would discuss their ratings with one another, could ask for explanations of the ratings of other raters, specifically in those instances where there were notable differences in the ratings. If after the discussions, raters decided to change the ratings, they were free to do so, but it was not required. And at the conclusion of this in-person meeting, the last iteration of ratings were used to calculate proposal scores, develop the final rank list of proposals, and develop the funding recommendations in accordance to the RFP, which would then be presented to the board as the ESC's funding recommendation. Our review of this discussion meeting began with what we thought was a rather simple question, and that is how to handle the ratings of ESC members who were not able to attend this meeting, discuss their ratings, and change their ratings. This simple question led to hours of debate and many analyses designed to investigate the impact of the discussion. It was during this review that we identified an issue of greater concern, and that is, during this discussion meeting, it is challenging to treat all proposals in a comparable manner. This slide identifies several items related to this issue, and most are described in the meeting materials provided. So I'll focus on 2 items that were not. The first, how are disparate ratings interpreted? And second, what is the impact of the discussion on the funding recommendations? Regarding disparate ratings, I will get a bit technical for a moment, so bear with me. We use an inter-class correlation to assess both inter-rater reliability, which is the relative consistency in the ratings, and inter-rater agreement, which is the absolute consensus in the ratings. We assess this correlation for each grants rating process and have correlations similar to those reported in published peer-reviewed journal articles for both grant applications and journal submissions, which do report lower levels of reliability. For these processes, researchers have suggested that a high inter-rater reliability is not desirable, as it may be an indicator that reviewers are not diverse, and therefore some are redundant. Alternatively, lower inter-rater reliability may indicate that the panel is highly competent because it represents a wide sample of the various views on what is good and valuable. So why am I boring you with these statistics? Because it reframed how we interpret disparate ratings. We have assumed that relatively disparate ratings should be discussed, and the process was designed to do so. But it is more likely that disparate ratings represent true diversity in the panel for which ESC members were selected. Regarding the impact of the discussion on the funding recommendations, our analyses focused on 5 recent grant processes. And across these 5 grants, a total of 294 proposals were evaluated. As a result of the discussion meetings, 4% lost funding, 2% gained funding, and 94% of the proposals, there was no change in the funding recommendation. The effect size suggested that the discussion meeting had no effect on proposal scores. The focus group that was convened regarding this recommendation was provided this information and discussed the other items identified on the slide. The focus group engaged in a productive discussion and at the end of the meeting agreed with the recommendation and discussed an ESC wrap-up process. The process document reflects the recommendation to no longer discuss or change ratings. Instead, the ratings submitted by the ESC members resulting from their individual evaluation are used to calculate the proposal scores, and those scores are used to develop the ranked list for funding recommendations. Once the rankings are finalized, BSCC staff will email the ESC members the tables of ranked proposals, the funding recommendations that will be presented to the board, and a link to an online survey. That survey will be designed to elicit feedback from the ESC members regarding the ESC process, the RFP, and the process for evaluating the proposals. This feedback can be used to improve or refine future grant-making efforts. At the discretion of each ESC, the members may decide upon an additional method to wrap up the ESC process. If an additional method is selected, the purpose would be for feedback, not to discuss proposals. This additional meeting may occur either before or after the presentation of the funding recommendations to the board, and ESC members will not be required to attend. Before I move on, would Chair Penner or Mr. Steinhardt like to make any comments regarding the focus group?
You knew it. And I don't want to take too much time on this, but we agonized in the focus group over eliminating this final discussion. And I was one of the semi-dissenters who believed that there was great strength and value in reassembling the raters to have a final discussion. My experience with the Youth Reinvestment Grant in the last round was that that discussion was a wow experience for many of the raters who in discussion decided to change their approach to certain proposals and rescore them because they said things like, well, yes, indeed, they did not identify the target group, as others pointed out, or that the CBO listed no credentials for all the things they promised. Oh, I overlooked that. Or that in diversion context, no point of intervention with the public system was identified where kids were going to be diverted to something else. And so there was just a great learning process involved in that final discussion. And we ended up, I think, going on the negative side and essentially low scoring 5 proposals that didn't make it. Now that, part of the argument is that statistically, the outcomes don't change that much as a result of the Raider meetings. But that's $1 million here and $1 million there that are now, if the proposals are disqualified, become theoretically available to fund a more worthy project someplace else in another cycle, even if the money goes back to general fund and is redistributed by the legislature. So those were just very hard to let go, and some of the members of the focus group are very passionate about the difficulty of letting go of the final discussion. Also, we've reversed our kind of theory of how to do this. Now, it used to be outliers are bad, and we're going to have the rating discussion in order to erase discrepancies in scoring and to bring the scoring model more towards the middle ground. Now, we're being told that based on industrial science and reliability studies and all those other things that were mentioned, outlying is good because it means that differences of opinion are adequately reflected in the scoring, and when you sort of mesh it all together, you get a more reliable outcome. I just, have to take some time to understand and digest that. So in the end, Casey said that the focus group agreed with the changes. We agreed by being tugged over the finish line, I have to say. And I was persuaded by these factors, against my inner feeling about what should happen. One is the growth in the number of proposals that we face. It just becomes so cumbersome when you have 100 proposals to guarantee that the final discussion will adequately deal with the quirks and circumstances of each proposal. And then the attendance problem is just huge. If you don't have the same people in the room that rated the proposals, then there are built-in disparities in what happened. And then finally, although this didn't move me much, the sort of statistical information that ultimately in the grand scale, it didn't make that big a difference in outcomes. Well, I thought each outcome was important. So kicking and screaming, I came over the line and said, okay, and that's how I feel. But I feel it's important to acknowledge that this is a big change, that it affects every grant program that comes before us, that we are eliminating a final round of evaluation in which important information is revealed and shared, and that even subject matter experts acknowledge is necessary information to their scoring. Now they won't have that opportunity in order to defer to these other needs that were mentioned. So I'll just stop there and say that I'm going to say no more. It's a close call, and it's a difficult decision.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with Mr. Steinhardt. I was on the focus group also, and I think he was pulling me across the finish line because this has been a long-standing practice. But in light of the number of proposals that were being asked to rate time after time after time, the meaningful last meeting where we got to hash it out seemed less and less pertinent, and the science won me over in the end. Casey did a good job of presenting to 2 people who started. In fact, David was really concerned that he and I agreed on something. But we made it through that. But it was absolutely very hard to let go of. There's an education piece to this that we think we built back in by allowing some feedback after the process is over. But, we are losing some of that sort of touching of all the different emphasis and conversations from people who are those outliers, but I can support this. Anybody else on the board? You weren't in the focus group, so you still get to speak if you'd like. Okay. Anybody in the public want to address this issue?
I still have a little bit more, if that's okay, and
Well,
then I'm
you know,
almost done.
Then we're way ahead of you. Okay.
Okay. All right, so our final recommended change is a technical issue related to the calculation of proposal scores when there is a missing rater. So if any raters submit ratings for only a subset of the proposals they were assigned, or if they submit only a portion of the ratings required to fully evaluate entire proposals, they are considered a missing rater, and all of the ratings from those raters are excluded from all score calculations. As a result, raters must submit a full set of ratings for all of their assigned proposals in order to have their ratings contribute to the evaluation process. So as a reminder, this agenda item requests approval of the grant proposal evaluation process and authorization for staff to follow the approved process for all ESCs, including those currently in progress. And this now concludes.
A final. Well, slightly early, but back to the board. Anybody in the public want to comment on this issue?
There are no public comments.
All right, I'm looking for a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation.
Second, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
You
That
caught
was a
that.
slow aye. Abstain? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Casey, and I think you're staying.
I am staying.
Are staying. We'll try
You
not
have
to
the
jump
pleasure
your
of
finish this
one
time.
more item. Okay, I will be presenting agenda item H. This item provides an overview of the Jail Profile Survey, JPS, presents an analysis of shifts in the jail population over the years, describes upcoming JPS system changes, and requests approval to modify the JPS to collect information related to late-night releases from jail. The Jail Profile Survey gathers jail-related information from type 2, 3, and 4 facilities. These facility types are county jails holding individuals who are awaiting trial or serving sentences. They do not include short-term lockups. Currently, 56 counties operate one or more of these facilities, and all participate in the Jail Profile Survey. Alpine and Sierra counties do not have these types of facilities. A wide range of information is gathered through the Jail Profile Survey, including number of bookings, average daily population, gender, the average daily population divided by sentenced and non-sentenced inmates, felony and misdemeanor offenses, inmates that require medical attention, inmates that require mental health attention, inmates housed under contract, releases due to a lack of capacity, inmate assaults on staff, the amount of money spent on medications and psychotropic medications, and the average length of stay. Over the years, the data have provided counties a means of tracking changes in their jail populations and projecting program and facility needs. It has also provided a means to inform stakeholders, researchers, policymakers, and other interested parties about local detention populations. Within the JPS, some data elements are reported monthly and some are reported quarterly. All are sent in to us on a quarterly basis. BSCC screens the data and communicates with the reporting agencies to help ensure accuracy and completeness, but we do not conduct investigations or audits of the data or data collection processes. Following the screening process, the data are made publicly available and can be accessed through our online query system. To ensure the posting of timely data, we make every effort to post data for a given quarter before the due date for the following quarter. Therefore, depending on where we are in that reporting and screening cycle, the posted data are not older than 6 months. Currently, data are publicly available through September 2019. We are in the process of screening fourth quarter 2019 data, and it will post by March 15th. There are a few key limitations of the jail profile survey. It has been in operation since 1966. The current version was developed in 2001 and has been in use since 2002. That brings us to the first limitation. Because of its age, modifications can be challenging, and the information it gathers may not reflect current needs or interests given the changes in the justice system over the years. Second, trends seen in statewide figures may not equally apply across counties. There may be diverse patterns among counties that reflect differences in policy approaches and other county-specific factors. Third, some counties are unable to report all of the data elements, and reporting for some data elements may be sporadic. These are usually due to county-specific issues related to the capabilities of their jail management software or due to staffing, resources, and turnover. Finally, while the data may reveal some interesting trends and represent the most complete source for jail information, we don't always know the county issues or policies that are driving those trends. In 2018, improvements were made to the data entry system used by local data reporters to include some validation checks, and these also provided some efficiencies for staff who screen the data. Additionally, in 2018, some data elements were eliminated because they were either no longer relevant, challenging to obtain, or there were quality concerns. These decisions were made based on feedback from an executive steering committee and a work group over the years. The slide lists the variables that are no longer collected for these reasons, but I do highlight that the number of unserved felony and misdemeanor warrants in the county were also eliminated because sheriffs were not the proper source for this information. And regarding the percent of current inmates believed not to have lawful immigration status, with the passage of Senate Bill 54, which was effective in January 2018, local agencies were no longer permitted to ask about immigration status, providing yet another reason to no longer collect this data element. A variety of JPS resources are available on the JPS webpage provided at the address on the slide. Here you will find Excel versions of the monthly and quarterly report forms, which were provided as attachments, the survey workbook that provides instructions to data reporters, the online query system for accessing the publicly posted data, and 2 reports that we update on a quarterly basis when we post new data. And that is a PDF called the Jail Population Trends Report. This breakdown provides trends from 2006 to the current reporting period at the statewide level for ADP, sentenced, non-sentenced, felony, misdemeanor, and the ADP of inmates awaiting transportation to state prison. We also provide that same information for each county from 2011 through the current reporting period. And again, that's updated quarterly. We also have a dashboard that allows users to interact with that data, reporting statewide level data, and them to select for specific counties to track their trends. So that completes the overview. I'll move on to our analysis of shifts in the population trends that we've seen over the years. These questions are high level, but I think that they provide a refresher on where we were in terms of jail populations and where we are now. For our first question, we asked what are the trends in the statewide ADP before realignment, after realignment, and after Prop 47. And we followed that up with the question, are these trends constant across the counties? Also, as an indicator of jail crowding, our third question investigated whether there was a change in the total number of facilities operating under their BSCC rated capacity. And finally, we investigated changes in the proportion of the population that is sentenced and non-sentenced in felony versus misdemeanor, particularly any changes we have seen in these before and after realignment and Prop 47. Before I reveal the results, I do want to acknowledge Michael Lee, a BSCC research analyst, who pulled together these figures in various forms many times and did so with a smile each time I asked for a change. So thank you, Michael. This figure presents the statewide average daily population, or ADP, for each month from January 2005 through September 2019, the latest available data. To summarize, the average daily population peaked in 2007 at about 84,000 inmates and then declined to 69,000 inmates by mid-2011. The ADPs increased with realignment, reaching a high of 83,000, declined with Prop 47, and are currently running around 74,000 inmates, a reduction of about 10,000 inmates compared to our peak in 2007. So we look to see if this trend of a reduction in jail populations was consistent across the counties. In this table, we present a comparison between the annual ADP for 2007 and 2019 at the statewide level and across jurisdictions in three size categories. Small jurisdictions, those are with a population of less than 250 inmates. Medium jurisdictions with 250 to 1,000 inmates, and large jurisdictions with greater than 1,000 inmates. Using the annual ADP, we find that the statewide population decreased 11% between 2007 and 2019, but this decrease was greatest for the large jurisdiction at 12%. But we do also see a slight reduction for the medium and small categories as well. We then looked at the jail incarceration rates from the state across the counties for 2007 and 2019. These rates provided another method to see if the reductions in the population were consistent across counties. The jail incarceration rate for the state declined 19% from 2007 to 2019. 35 counties also reduced their incarceration rate in this time period. This figure uses color coding to categorize the changes in the incarceration rates across the counties into 4 categories: an increase of 25% or greater, an increase less than 25%, a decrease less than 25%, and a decrease of 25% or more. The majority of the counties have decreased their incarceration rates. These counties are shaded in blue. While fewer counties have increased their incarceration rates, these counties are shaded in orange. The larger increase of 25% or greater is seen in just 5 counties. 4 of these are small jurisdictions, and 1 is a medium-sized jurisdiction. Having seen the decline in jail population across the state and in most counties, we then looked at changes in the total number of facilities operating under their BSCC rated capacity as an indicator of jail crowding. In 2019, 73% of facilities operated under their board rated capacity, an increase of 23% compared with 2007 figures. While we know that capacity has increased over the years with the recent facility construction and through the state finance process, that increase hasn't been consistent across the state. Some counties built, some replaced, and some remain the same. While the story may vary from county to county, the bottom line is that our data shows less crowding since 2007. And our final question was whether we have seen shifts in the proportion of the population that is sentenced and non-sentenced and for felony or misdemeanor offenses. This figure presents the proportion that is sentenced and non-sentenced for 4 time periods. The third quarter of 2007, a period when we saw the population at its peak. The third quarter of 2011, just prior to realignment. The third quarter of 2014, just prior to Proposition 47. And the third quarter of 2019, the most current available data. The bottom line is the proportions are similar to 2007 before the changes. Most of the population, about 68%, is non-sentenced. These figures will be interesting to track as policies continue to change, most specifically the elimination of cash bail. This figure presents the proportion of felony and misdemeanor offenses for the same 4 time periods. The bottom line is most of the population represents felony offenses. This proportion has increased about 6% since 2007, and the misdemeanor population has decreased. These shifts are as anticipated with the changes over the years with realignment and Proposition 47. This concludes the presentation of the analysis of trends. I'm going to take a little bit more of your time to discuss some important technical assistance updates and a few changes planned for the JPS system. Over the last year, staff focus on providing technical assistance to local data reporters has increased. We currently host a teleconference meeting with data reporters on a quarterly basis. These newly established meetings are intended to provide training to and check-in with county data reporters with the goal of improving the process and quality of JPS data reporting. These meetings provide the data reporters an opportunity to ask questions, voice concerns, and learn more about the data submission process. Additionally, these meetings allow the BSCC to better understand any issues data reporters experience. You may be aware of a recent policy brief that used JPS data to conduct an analysis of open mental health cases and the use of psychotropic medications. The policy brief also included recommendations to improve data quality for these variables. The recommendation regarding the accuracy of data was brought to our attention during their analysis phase, and validation checks have already been added to the BSCC screening process. These validation checks began with the screening of fourth quarter 2019 data, and we will also address these concerns in previously reported data. During the next quarterly call with data reporters that is scheduled for February 20th, we will review this policy brief and focus the discussion on the recommendations to improve data quality. We will work on collecting the definitions used by each county for these variables. Reviewing this policy brief with the data reporters will help us to highlight the importance of accurate, reliable data reporting. Additionally, outside of this call, we will connect with counties that report inconsistently to determine the cause and discuss possible solutions. The system used to manage the JPS data is antiquated. The processing, basic analyses, and reporting of the survey data were developed over 15 years ago. With the exception of transitioning the database to a more stable platform in recent years, no updates have been made to the components used by staff to manage the process of screening, publishing, and reporting the data. BSCC now has the internal information technology staff resources to update this portion of the system. Updates will be made to make the system more flexible, to better accommodate future modifications or requirements, and to gain efficiencies for staff who manage the data reporting processes. These updates are targeted and narrow in scope. They are not intended as an overhaul of the JPS system, which would be beyond the scope of system capabilities and current resources. And for this item, we are recommending adding data elements to collect information about late-night releases. Determination of how this information is collected would be made in consultation with reporting jurisdictions and subject matter experts. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you,
Any
Casey.
questions? You're welcome.
Questions, anybody? Comments?
So I've got one comment or a couple. So, I mean, it's not related to that specific agenda item because the request is specific to the nighttime releases, but there are a couple, I do think we need to consider at some point in the near future updating some of the items here, specifically H3 refers to the total number of sentenced inmates released early, work release, electronic monitoring, et cetera, due to lack of housing capacity. And I think, in our current environment, we have a lot of people that are in alternative incarceration programs that they're not technically released. They're not counted as an in-custody count, but they are serving a sentence in something other than jail, and they're not driven by capacity. So I think at some point in the future, we need to split those two, where maybe you count capacity releases, but I think it's important that we start recognizing and tracking the number of people that we have serving a sentence outside of custody and an alternative. That one's pretty glaring, and then the other one, I think at some point we should consider, or at least discuss, collecting the number of parole violators serving terms in county jail, because it's had a big impact subsequent to realignment. So those are the two primary ones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second, the concern about parole violators.
I think it's fair to say, we know this is sort of very antiquated and needs improvement, and I think we're going to move down this road. We're going to add this one caveat now. I mean, I'm not going to ask Sheriff Gore to regurgitate all we talked about before the meeting, but we do understand capturing only ADP is not really indicative of.
And I take back some of those, because I'm looking at the form, and under H, it says total number of persons booked this month,
Right.
which would give that total number. But it appears to me, all the analysis done, it seems to be done on ADP. A couple of slides back, you had San Diego County down as showing an increase in, which I think is accurate. That's increase in the total number of people I've put through my jail. But my ADP has stayed pretty consistent. So I don't know if we've mixed them there, if we looked at increase being the total number of inmates I put through, but my ADP is staying relatively static. I don't know.
I'm going to invest, is it the state
That-
map?
That one.
Oh, right, yeah, so that would be a rate, so it would be affected also by your population changes.
Yeah. And maybe I'm an outlier, but, my ADP is so different than the total number of people I put through my facility. And it skews all the stats to my disadvantage,
Right.
to make it very personal. And I don't know how we address that. I think it's an easier way to compare jails looking at ADP, but I don't think it's the most accurate way to compare. We've had professional statisticians that have said, you've got to look at the total at-risk population. That means the total number of people you put through your facility during a year or 10-year period, not just how many you have at any given time. So
I couldn't agree more, and I think we can then get into the conversation about length of stay and services
Right.
provided during that
Right.
length of stay. ADP doesn't tell you that. ADP is a snapshot. And so we have a system that's needs some help, and when we recognize that there are limitations to the data that we collect. And I think that'll, as I said earlier, will be another road that we'll travel down in the near future to ensure that people are, from all factions and stakeholders and people who care about this data, are getting the best data we can provide them.
And I was just
Oh,
going to say,
sorry.
the length of stay is a key factor. I'm glad to see that it's collected quarterly, and of course, it impacts ADP, which is different from bookings, as you were headed towards. So glad to see that. And I'd like to see some charting of the LOS outcomes, too.
And we, you look at those 1 to 3 day churners that are booked, but, what is the long-range impact and what impact does?
That's a very high-risk part of our
And
population.
it, right,
First 1 to 7 days.
right. And all of that speaks to many, many trends that I think we could provide if we had a system that assisted us with that. So I think we're working towards it. Anybody else? Anybody from the, yes?
If you're going to put together a group to kind of look at this, I would volunteer.
Great. Right. Come into a theater near, Casey needs more to do, obviously. So I think that really helps. So we'll ask the audience or the public if there's any comments on this item. And
If
then-
I may, just
Yes.
jump in,
You're
Madam
not in the
Chair.
audience. I just wanna
I'm
share
not
that
in
with
the
you.
audience.
Yeah.
I just want to really acknowledge the hard work of our research team, all of the different updates that Casey provided here. First of all, this is another example of the ways in which we want to bring some of these tremendous work products of the BSCC staff to this board more often. We haven't come to you to show you the jail population, the JPS survey, and the trends that we can show and all of that. It really is some of the best available information in the state, even though we absolutely acknowledge that there is a lot more that we would like to be able to do. We're taking on some of the more urgent matters right now on our own motion and absolutely welcome the continued conversation. I appreciate the technical assistance that Casey and the research team and also our admin team have been able to do to address some of the technical issues. I think the quarterly calls with the data reporters are really important as well. So this is just something where we want to talk about what we have in place and how we can make it better. So thanks for
When you
offering.
say the data reporters, that's the person that, in my.
Or local
that runs
person
my
who-
jail management system.
Absolutely.
And they have access to go in and do all these, access all your reports.
Yeah, and that's
do
the
it all.
person or
That's right.
people who are responsible for turning in the JPS data to the BSCC. So it's a pretty regular group, is my understanding, and Casey and Tia and others on her team are getting on the call to say, here's what we want you to understand better, here are some issues we're aware of, and as Casey mentioned, the policy brief, even though, there were some suggestions about ways to improve that data, in many ways, the JPS is the only game in town for collecting some information about jail populations and issues, and we want to make it better.
Do outside agencies have access to that? Is that a-
Oh, yes, absolutely. You can run a query by state or by county over a time period. Mhm.
Yeah, it's all public, all on the website. All right, believe there's no public comment. We have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Thank you for a lot of heavy lifting today. I appreciate that. So we will be adding that one other data point to the jail profile survey with work down the road, I think is what we're committed to further that. We're now at the point in the meeting where we have finished the formal agenda, and I would invite any members of the public that want to make a comment before adjournment on any issue that they may have interest in. Do we have anybody, Adam?
Do not have any comments.
Seeing none, I believe we're adjourned. Thank you all for being here.